Hello everyone, welcome to our first breakout session where it's called From Classroom to Courtroom, India's AI Leap in 2026. The theme of today's breakout session is, we have all been noticing these recent developments of different kinds of AI tools, and I'm sure almost everyone has tried out using ChatGPT, and maybe in a lot of cases you found it to be very useful as well. The thing is, while ChatGPT was originally being developed as a general purpose chat bot, but people started to try to create variants of these kinds of chatbots in order to perform a lot of specialized tasks. The way standard AI chatbots like ChatGPT are built, they're great for general conversations. They can mimic how we humans basically engage in conversations. They mimic that very well. But the moment we start moving towards any kind of specialized area, in general we see that ChatGPT just doesn't really work well. In order to make a chatbot like ChatGPT to work well in any kind of specialized area, there we need some kind of additional, what we call in the area of machine learning, some additional training on data that is representative of these specialized kind of domains. And usually with that kind of training, we tend to see ChatGPT starts working a lot better for specialized tasks. But unless these kinds of large chatbots are trained for these kinds of specialized tasks, in general they don't necessarily work well. Can I just very quickly ask, what is your background, like, to the students who are present here? From what education or what degree are you pursuing right now?
We are from legal background.
Okay.
LLM.
Okay. And all of you are from? BTech CSE. Oh, very nice. And all of you? BTech CSE. Okay. So a mixture of engineering and legal backgrounds here. In this talk, we will basically be focusing on general education, where we'll look at some examples of school education, but some of the principles that we can take, kind of conclude from the discussion. It will be in general helpful for us as well when we are interacting with these chatbots in order to educate ourselves. And then there's a very interesting discussion on how AI tools can be applied in the legal area, which is of course a very important use case, especially in India's legal landscape of today, which we'll discuss more in detail in a bit. So let's start with our discussion on how AI can basically help in the education sector. So if we think about India's current scenario, we really want every citizen to have access to education, and every person will naturally come with a wide range of interests and a lot of different reading levels. So whenever we are designing any kind of curriculum, we might have some standard in mind, but there are going to be some students for whom that curriculum might be too easy. They might want to look at something more advanced. For some students, the curriculum might be much more challenging. Maybe some additional assistance might be required for them to more readily grasp the contents. For some students, the basic reason of why this subject exists, why is this curriculum designed, why do they need to study this subject, this question is not often answered really well. I'm sure even in school we had a lot of subjects which we didn't really want to study that much. I mean, I certainly had. So why exactly are these subjects present? What are its importances? These are something that are very important to be able to clarify, but a lot of times these are not clarified very well. And if we look at India's current scenario, could you just go back? We see that there's a very high student to teacher ratio in schools by some recent estimates. Overall, across India, we have 24.8 crore students, but the number of teachers are only 98 lakh, and this is at school level. At higher education, we have 4.33 crore students, and the total faculty that we have in order to handle all of these students are only 15.98 lakh. So this gap in this discrepancy in the number of students and the number of educators, this is a huge challenge that we have right now. Additionally, because India is such a diverse country, we want students from all backgrounds to come and have access to education. But each student may come from a wide variety of backgrounds with different local languages. They might be comfortable speaking in different local languages. For example, I can share an experience when I joined engineering back in 2008. So basically, I joined at a college where the textbooks were all in English, but some students who came from a Bengali medium school, they were finding it difficult to basically very quickly read a lot of passages in English and understand what is being said. In our college, there were even students from different states, and while a lot of students, even when they were not able to grasp the content in English, they could have conversations maybe by combining Bengali and English with the local faculty. But then there were students from Bihar who were also not comfortable in Bengali. So not only are the textbooks in a language which they don't naturally think in, but also when a lot of conversations are happening, they're trying to translate what they're thinking into English. They're trying to translate it into any kind of language that they can communicate in. But then when the faculty are comfortable in Bengali and English and the students are not comfortable in either, this language gap remains a big challenge even today. So these are some areas where different kinds of AI apps might be quite beneficial. So when we start thinking from the perspective of students, we can ask, okay, how can these different AI tools that are being developed make education more accessible to students? So let's say we have a certain subject material in mind which we want to a student to engage with. So maybe if the student finds the material a little bit too difficult, is it possible to translate the material to a level so that the student can understand that material very easily? Maybe the student doesn't have proper background for that material. So can that background be presented to the student even though it's not present in the textbook itself? Additionally, of course, language is a big question. We want any student who is comfortable with their own language to be able to actually think and have a conversation in their own language on any topic, because that is going to let them develop their own sort of intuitive, creative sense of what a concept is trying to impart to them. Additionally, whenever we want AI tools to exist for students, we want the AI tool to have a capability to basically create questions to students so that a student can try to answer those questions, and then if they cannot answer those questions very well, maybe the AI will help guide them to why their thinking is not correct, in what ways, what parts of the concept are they missing right now. So there are some tools that exist right now. We just named a few: Magic School, Brisk Teaching, Gemini for Education. For this breakout session, we're going to be demonstrating Magic School. So in Magic School, I think we can just take a demo. Let's take a copy of this image. So this image is from an NCERT science textbook. And let's say in Magic School, there's an AI tool called an AI Learning Assistant, which is available for students. So these are not free tools, unfortunately. These are premium tools, but right now there is a lot of discussion going on in India regarding developing these kinds of tools for everyone. So we can have a look at what are premium tools that are available right now in order to see where AI is at like what is it, in what way is it helpful, and in what way is it not. So let's say we take an image of a text from an NCERT 10th standard science question, and let's say we ask just the AI, like, can you help explain what is present in this screenshot of this book that I'm currently reading? So maybe we can just first go back to the slide and see the image once more. And so if you see at the left, that's just a screenshot of a discussion related to potential energy. And so maybe a student, when they're reading this text, they're going through this text, but if we just go through this text slowly, it's saying an object increases its energy when raised through a height. This is because work is done on it against gravity while it is being raised. So if we notice this language, this is proper textbook language. And so if a student is already comfortable with the narration of the textbook, then they'll maybe be able to follow this text very well. But a lot of students might not find this narration to be very easy to grasp. Maybe after reading 5 or 6 lines, their attention will start to fade. So maybe the student thinks, okay, I want to understand this text, but is there a way to basically get some kind of a more lucid, more informal explanation? Once I get that explanation, then maybe I can go back and follow this text more rigorously. So if we take a screenshot of that, and if we ask it just something like, please explain what is present here, then almost instantaneously we see a response from the AI. And if we just very slowly just look at how the AI starts presenting the discussion. So if we start from the beginning, so it says that this text explains gravitational potential energy, a fundamental concept in physics. Let me break down what's being discussed. And we see that the AI is actually breaking the discussion into a lot of small size chunks. So even if a student is not comfortable, not very comfortable with English, when the student sees like these kind of structured ways of a discussion being presented, then any concept that at that point the student was finding maybe a little bit difficult to follow, it might be a bit easier to go through it just because of this additional structure that is being present. So we can just kind of look at what is the overall structure. There's a general statement on what is gravitational potential energy. Then there's what are the key concepts being explained here. So clearly it's outlining what is the purpose of this text. After that, a formula is going to be discussed. Very clearly, each notation in the formula is being explained. What does each symbol mean? Then there's a very short description of how this formula was obtained. And then once the overall form of this formula is discussed, then a real world example is used in order to illustrate why it's necessary to understand a formula of this form. And so this is just an example of how, if a student wants to use these kinds of AI tools as a learning assistant, how they would use it. Absolutely. So that's a very good point to raise. The ChatGPT is also really good at doing these kinds of summarizations. In fact, when we think about AI tools in general, one task that it does very well is text summarization and text explanation. As long as it's not a very hard to understand, or if it's a concept on which there is very few text available, then ChatGPT in general doesn't work very well. But for a lot of concepts on which there is a lot of text, then summarizing text and expanding explanations is something that it does very well. The only thing is, maybe for school students, we might not feel very comfortable giving them access to ChatGPT because ChatGPT doesn't have a lot of restrictions. During his session, Raghuram sir also showed that what are different ways in basically information which you would not want someone to have access to, that can unfortunately be accessed from these LLMs, either intentionally or unintentionally through basically a sequence of discussions. One might end up at a place where a lot of concepts might, or a lot of discussions might happen on topics that we wouldn't want a student to have. So in order to not reach that place, a lot of restrictions need to be placed. So usually these kinds of platforms, they have certain AI tool auditing setups through which they test whether their tools have that capacity, whether they show that restriction if a conversation moves towards topics which maybe we don't want a child to engage in, then the LLM will basically stop. There are different ways in which they can do it. They can redirect the conversation, they can refuse to engage in that conversation. But these AI tools are being built with those restrictions in mind. Having said that, this is still a discussion that is ongoing on how good these restrictions are actually working. Because at the end of the day, these LLMs are stochastic tools, so they're probabilistic text generators. The restrictions are also in general a combination of probabilistic tools as well as deterministic tools. So a lot of these platforms, they do advertise how thorough their AI auditing setups are so that those restrictions do not get violated. However, I think this is still an area where a lot of open discussions are happening because we also want children to have access to tools only if we are very confident that the reasonable restrictions that we impose, those will not be violated. So, this is an example of if I had a certain text in mind and I just wanted to generate an explanation, I can ask for an explanation. But let's say I am a student, like this is a textbook from this is an excerpt from a 10th standard textbook. But let's say I am a 8th standard student and I don't really have a lot of the knowledge that exists in order to engage with the concepts that are present in the class 10 textbook. However, I would like to, I'm just curious, I'm interested. So, let's say I ask the AI tool like that, okay, I'm from the 8th standard, can you explain what is happening here to me? So what we expect is the story by which the AI tool will present this discussion, that story will change in order to be more accessible for an 8th standard student. So if we see, I think this didn't come here, presentation. I'll switch. The website is not coming here. Okay. So what we see is, and we can almost kind of role play as an 8th standard student. We're not expecting an 8th standard student to give a very detailed prompt, something very simple like, I'm from the 8th standard, can you explain it to me or something. So now we see the narrative changes. So the AI is starting by presenting some simple examples which an 8th standard student would find easier to follow. After presenting some simple examples, and the examples are also present in a way where, since this is a discussion on potential energy, so it's about creating almost this visual image that leads to this idea of what a potential energy can be. And based on a tennis ball or a bookshelf, a book on a shelf. So it's always about creating something very visual. In that visual image, what exactly is being talked about when we are saying potential energy. After that, it's going into a little bit more detail, a brief explanation, then it's going into the formula. So as you can see, the structure is changing, and it's changing the story according to the student's standard. So this is something that the AI tools are very good at as well, to adjust the explanation based on a person's background. And this is something that we can try out as well, like if we're using ChatGPT and let's say we're interested in, I don't know, understanding a concept from theoretical physics or something. We can always say, okay, look, this is my background. I came across this term maybe in a newspaper. I would like to understand what is it. So adjusting an explanation to an individual's level We're saying that this is something that ChatGPT does or any other AI tool is doing very well. Additionally, one of the original motivations that we talked about when we started this discussion was the variation in language, something that we expect to happen in India, that students are going to come from different backgrounds. So here, if let's say I just write to this AI tool that can you explain this to me in Bengali, then let's see what happens. And we see, at least for a majority of the widely spoken Indian languages, a lot of these AI tools are really good at creating explanations in different languages. So we see that the reading level is still being maintained for a class 8 student, but the words and phrases that are being used have been changed, have been translated to Bengali. So someone who's more comfortable to think in Bengali, for them this explanation will be much more easier to follow. Now let's say the student who already specified that they're an 8th standard student and they ask for the explanations in Bengali. Now let's say they have an idea of what the concept that is being discussed is, and they want to just kind of do some self-validation. They want to be presented some questions which they'll try to answer. So maybe the student asks the AI tool that, and maybe the student writes this in English, but it's basically going to be a question in Bengali. So if we write, let's say, আমায় কয়েকটা প্রশ্ন জিজ্ঞেস করবে? আমায় কয়েকটা প্রশ্ন জিজ্ঞেস করবে? I don't think you can copy it. You can just type it. উত্তর দিতে পারি, ঠিক আছে, it's fine. So for self-evaluation, when a student is asking, and the student is asking also, they're not even typing in Bengali, they're typing in English, but the language that they're presenting is Bengali, again, is being understood properly, and questions for self-evaluation are being generated in Bengali. So this is just to present an overview of how AI tools can be useful for students. With the proper restrictions, we see that the generation of explanations for different kinds of texts, the discussions presented in regional languages, as well as asking these AI tools to present questions as well, so that someone can self-evaluate. These are things that these AI tools are doing quite well. So now, for the education sector, if we move from the perspective of students to the perspective of teachers, we can ask how can these kinds of AI tools be useful for teachers? So in general, again, because of the high student to teacher ratio, we know that for a lot of teachers, the workload can often be quite high. With a very high workload, we might expect that a teacher in their school, they might be handling a lot of responsibilities. Now if on a random day, if they're supposed to teach a certain text, even if it's a text that they've taught a lot of times before, they might want to very quickly summarize what it is that they want anyone who is attending the class to basically able to learn from that discussion. So let's say a teacher is planning on discussing this chapter on work and energy, from which we actually took the screenshot from the NCERT textbook. And let's say the teacher asks, okay, I am familiar with this text, but I just want to recall what are the learning objectives, so that when I'm going to be discussing with students, I would like to make sure that all of these learning objectives are met, that the students can walk away from this class learning all of these points. So let's say we now look at a tool that is designed for teachers. So in Magic Plus, they have these different sections for students and for teachers. So for the teacher part, we'll just use the general, there's a general chatbot present here. We can attach the chapter as a PDF, and we can just ask this chatbot that, can you just tell me what are the learning objectives for this chapter? The general theme being, how do we reduce workload for teachers? So given a material, let's say a teacher just wants to revise in their head. What is the point of this chapter? What are the general learning objectives? So very instantly, they're getting a summary of all of the learning objectives. So they can just go through this, and this quick revision is going to help them create an overall image of what is going to be taught in the classroom. So it can be helpful for preparation. Additionally, let's say, again, it's a question of workload reduction. So let's say a teacher wants to present some quiz questions to this class, and one challenge you might say that a lot of educators face is we can't really use a lot of the same questions multiple times because students are also very intelligent. They might track like what were the class quiz questions that were presented in the previous year or in the previous 2 years, and they might just like kind of try to memorize the answers to those questions. So in general, we would like teachers to always be generating new class quizzes so that they can verify how well the students have learned the material. But again, sitting down and creating new questions all the time, that's also, it has a certain mental load, and especially if we, as we move up towards higher education, this is definitely creating new questions takes a lot of time. So let's say for this text, we just ask, like, can you prepare 5 quiz questions? And let's say it generates some quiz questions along with, let's say, what are the answers to those questions. If we want to only generate, let's say, multiple choice questions, we can even ask that as well. So if we ask it like, can we generate 5 MCQs? And so, because these are probabilistic tools, we can expect that every time we ask these tools to perform a task like this, to generate quiz questions, to generate MCQs, it will keep generating new questions. Of course, there needs to be a teacher who actually goes through these questions and verifies whether they are correct and whether they are meeting the learning objectives. But at least one part of the task, which is the creation of the questions, that can to a certain extent be that workload can be reduced by generating these questions. And if a teacher deems maybe some of these questions to be useful and helpful to illustrate the concepts, then maybe those questions can be selected, or a teacher can even adapt those questions, maybe change it slightly and adapt it to the class that they're teaching. And of course, these questions can be generated in different languages as well. So these are areas where we see that the AI tools are quite helpful. But right at the beginning, before we move on to discussing AI tools for how AI tools are used for legal situations, I'll talk about one big drawback that exists when we're thinking about using AI tools for education. So I'm sure that even if you have tried to use ChatGPT and other similar tools in order to learn a concept, you must have seen that the good side of it was that you get very clear explanations, you can interact with the AI tool, And a lot of difficult concepts can be very easily be simplified by these kinds of AI tools. However, when you're going through a lot of text which ChatGPT is presenting to you, you might have had this feeling that while you are seeing what ChatGPT is saying, it might take a little bit of time to actually question what is happening. What we in general very loosely call critical thinking. So when we're thinking about a concept, it's not just about what the concept is, but what it isn't. And so questioning every part of the definition of a concept, trying to understand what would have happened if certain parts of a concept were altered. All of this is part of what we call in general as critical thinking. When ChatGPT generates a long explanation, a lot of times it's very difficult to start critically questioning what ChatGPT has just produced. So actually this is an area that is being actively researched right now. It's called AI surrender. Very recently it has been coined as AI surrender. The idea being that when someone who is interested in education is engaging with these chatbots, after being presented a lot of information, the experience that they're getting, it's almost like one person is looking at you and they're just dumping a lot of information on you and you're not actually saying anything. That actually creates a bit of an inhibition in how you would usually critically raise a lot of questions or how we would think critically about it. So this is a big challenge that especially people are observing in high school students. There have been a lot of studies that are showing that high school students who are using ChatGPT a lot are not coming up with critical questions that students earlier were. So while this is something that is being observed, how is this going to be, what is the extent of this surrender of critical thinking and what are ways in which this can be mitigated? This is an ongoing discussion that is happening right now. And I think it's good to raise this because I think it's something that can affect us as well when we are using these tools for our own education. So this is just a broad view of how AI tools are being used in the education sector where we are right now. It's still a developing landscape, so we'll see how things develop from here in the next couple of months as well, as the government also steps in and introduces different AI tools for education. Now moving on to the use of AI in the legal sector. Just as we saw that in the case of education, we talked about teacher workload reduction. And from the perspective of students who are not experts in education, we looked at providing better access of education for the students. We can have a similar discussion in the legal field as well. So currently right now, if we just look at some statistics, there are 4.8 crore pending cases. This is just some recent statistics. If we look at the number of lawyers and judges who are present in order to go through each case and actually reach any kind of decision, even there's a very big discrepancy. We need a lot more lawyers and a lot more judges in order to deal with this high rate of incidence of new cases as well. So in what way can different AI tools be used to reduce the workload for anyone engaging in the legal field, whether it's lawyers or judges or even the average citizen who would really be interested in understanding the law as it pertains to their current situation. They maybe want to understand it very well, again in their own regional language. So how are these questions being addressed by AI tools? We can have a look at that. So if we go to the next slide, currently two legal platforms that currently a lot of people are using are SSC Online and Bharat Law. And both of these platforms have very specific ways of using these kinds of AI tools. The reason why the usage is very specific is a lot of restrictions need to be placed right now, even more than the restrictions that we are thinking about in the education sector. Because if a lawyer uses an AI tool to generate a lot of legal text and it contains citations towards cases that don't exist, as we have heard that these kinds of AI tools, they are very prone to what is called hallucinations, because these are probabilistic text generators. They'll generate something that in the context of that discussion they will deem as being highly probable. So they'll just generate that text. However, if a lawyer uses any kind of generated text that contains citations but to cases that don't exist, then they will be in serious trouble if a judge notices these kinds of usages. So, keeping that in mind, that these platforms, they need to be very accurate regarding their use of citation, we'll look at how these platforms provide some kind of an AI legal research assistant, because whenever working on any case, doing proper research is of course a very time consuming task. For people who are students of the legal field, you must have seen the traditional software that is usually used. So it's a very structured software. So you have to understand the syntax very well. Whenever you're thinking about performing a certain search, you have to in your mind translate your search to that syntax. And it's a tool that you definitely need a little bit of training and quite a bit of experience in order to use it very well. So here, if we want almost to use this AI, some kind of AI tool, as a way to translate from natural language to very accurate search results, what can be done? That is a problem that both SSC Online and Bharat Law are trying to solve right now. And now we can have a look at the legal research assistant that they are presenting. I think this one we can show from the slides, because also because of time, but also. So let's say we want to perform a search. Let's say our search prompt is we're interested in recent Supreme Court judgments on the maintainability of a writ petition where an alternative remedy exists under the SAR-FAESI Act. So this act is related to seizure of property by financial institutions when certain loans are not being paid. So if we look at one of the platforms, SSC Online, it has this smart search feature where just in natural language this kind of a prompt can be provided, and some additional options can be checked. If this search is done, then what SSC Online presents is, next slide. This is the result that it shows. So on one side we see basically some filter options in order to refine the search. The middle column here is basically a list of different kind of judgments that the AI tool enabled search engine deemed as highly relevant to this question. And if any of these options are selected, then on the right pane, what is actually shown is a summary of this of the judgment that was for that particular case. So for example, so this is actually the original document. So if we scroll through this entire document, we see there is a lot of text present here that a lawyer would have to go through. Maybe with their experience, they would properly understand which areas to emphasize more when they are skimming through a document like this, which areas to focus a lot more on. The advantage of using those kinds of tools is that not only is search being performed, but a summarization of the entire document is also being provided on the right side of the document. So this is an expansion of the summarization. This is the complete summarization of that is being presented here instead of the original document, which is present on the left side. You can look at the scroll bar. The size of it will indicate that it's a long document, but the middle and the right pane are the complete summarization of this document. And so all of the different judgments that were identified as relevant to this prompt, for all of the cases, these kinds of summarizations can be obtained, and these are interactable summarizations. So at any point, if any particular part that is highlighted in blue, if that raises question, and if one wants to look more into what is present there, they can click it and it will go to that corresponding document. And so we just looked at an example of how AI tools are used as research assistants. Additionally, there are these AI tools can be used as drafting assistants, as we have already discussed that in general AI tools happen to be really good at summarizing documents as well as generating a lot of long explanations. If you look at some general chatbots, they are usually not very good at generating legal documents, and if they do, they will be erroneous. There will be errors present. But these kinds of platforms, they have basically further trained these chatbots so that when it is generating different kinds of legal documents, at least they are claiming that the errors are going to be minimal to none. So let's say I want to see how an AI tool can be used as a drafting assistant. So here there's one tool called Legal Space, where there is this tool in Legal Space called for draft management, and there I can just write it. I can give this prompt: draft a standard Indian commercial lease agreement, redline it to be more favorable to the tenant, especially focusing on the force majeure clause in light of post-2020 disruptions. If I provide it with this prompt, then what this drafting assistant creates is actually this kind of a document, and this document will have a lot of placeholders. Like if I just click on that document, it expands it, and it has several placeholders where one can actually place the names of the people involved in this lease agreement. Additionally, the interface that is provided here, this is actually a proper Word document, so any part can be edited just as one would in any kind of Microsoft Word-like software. So we saw two use cases that currently exist. One is as a legal research assistant, and one is as a drafting assistant. Another important use case is, of course, access to justice. If any ordinary citizen has questions on different aspects of the law, what can they do? Right now, we did a little bit of research, and we think that maybe ChatGPT right now is a tool with the most amount of restrictions that we would want it to have. What restrictions would we want it to have? We wouldn't want ChatGPT to say, to say something definite. Like, okay, if you go through the legal system, then this is the outcome that you will get. So this is not something that it should say. So some tools like ChatGPT and Gemini, they are doing this to a certain extent. Right now, what we're not sure of is basically what is the audit process that they have followed. But we'll have a look at how this works. So let's say, because this question of providing some kind of interface where a citizen can just go and interact and ask questions on law, this is something that we want to develop, especially if we want someone to be able to interact with this tool in a regional language. So let's say someone opens a tool like ChatGPT and asks, explain tenant rights under Indian law to a person with no legal background. So what we see ChatGPT generates is, again, a very structured response, explaining tenant in a very lucid manner so that anyone can understand. Now let's say we want this kind of an explanation, but we want it to be generated in some kind of a regional language like Bengali. So we can just ask it, explain this to me in Bengali. This would provide, again, it's a question of accessibility. How do you try to make something that when an ordinary citizen approaches and asks questions in their own regional language, they also want to get a response that is in their own regional language. So while these operations, we see that these AI tools, they perform quite well, we also want to make sure that proper restrictions are in place, that it doesn't perform legal education. So usually even now, if we ask most of the popular chatbots, like some question, let's say for example, whether in a certain case someone will get bail or not, then the way these AI tools are trained, they either provide refusal, or they show a disclaimer, or they provide some kind of message and redirect the conversation so that it does not say something definite as to if the citizen goes through the legal procedure, what outcome should they expect, or saying something that's extremely definite regarding what they should expect. So even in this case, we see actually a disclaimer right at the beginning that these are things that it can do and these are things that it cannot do. So in Canada, it says, I cannot guarantee bail, I cannot replace a lawyer or a judge, I cannot give case-specific legal advice as a lawyer. So having these restrictions are of course very important. So with this, we're really interested in seeing in what way AI tools can be useful in the legal field in general. We can look at the three cases that we looked at were as a legal research assistant, as a drafting assistant, and as providing more access to the knowledge on law to any citizen. But there are some very interesting recent use cases that we can look at as well. So one question related to access to justice is, when certain discussions are ongoing in courts, can we get transcriptions of those ongoing discussions so that anyone can follow by just reading the transcriptions as well? So right now there's one Adalat AI tool that even in Kerala High Courts, it has been mandated so that all conversations that happen in the court, real-time transcriptions can be provided for those discussions. Additionally, while we mostly discussed how the tools are being offered to lawyers as well as normal citizens, we can ask how would the AI tools be useful for judges specifically. So there's a very general e-courts project that is present in India, which is about using a digital platform in order to provide legal services much more efficiently. As part of the e-courts project, there is this SUPACE portal, which this part is about how AI can be used in order to assist judges. So here there are a lot of roles that an AI can play in sorting of cases, to a certain extent in some kind of predictive analysis which would be presented to a judge in order to help someone in digital filing of cases, and of course in general to perform quick research. So this platform is of course something that is being developed and is one of the main use cases of these kinds of platforms is to provide some kind of AI aid to judges, and we expect judges to be the experts in this field, so they will have that intuitive sense as well when working with these AI tools, like what are outputs from these AI models that can be used or can be adapted. We can expect them to have that best sense as well, with which these PSE portals are currently being developed, and there's an ongoing development related to these kinds of portals. So just to summarize what we spoke about today. So first of all, we don't want to have this sense that AI can act as a lawyer or a teacher. We want to be very clear about it. AI is not a lawyer, it's not a teacher. But there are a lot of cases where AI can provide some kind of assistance, whether it is as providing better access to education, or providing better access to legal knowledge, or in order to help reduce the workload. So if someone's working in the education field, how do you reduce the workload of a teacher? How do you, for someone working in the legal field, how do you reduce workload for a lawyer or a judge? In today's times, where we're seeing a huge amount of workload existing for people working in the education and legal sector, this is a place where we expect AI tools to just alleviate that workload pressure while also providing better access to anyone. So yeah, with that, we'll just end the first discussion on that was on education and legal usage. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes.
Recently, the Institute of International Hotel Management launched an AI platform where they claim that they had put in a lot of material on food technology and hotel management related subjects. It's a paid tool. So my question is, how would a domain-specific AI platform, is it expected to work better than a generic one like ChatGPT?
Yes. In general, a lot of the general AI tools like ChatGPT, Google Gemini and all, they are trained on text that is present on the internet. So one challenge that exists is that it can look at any text that anyone wrote on the internet, and they can try to pass it off as expert knowledge. So it's something that we saw when Google first started rolling out Gemini as part of their search, where it was advocating for the applying glue on pizza so that cheese sticks on it better and stuff like that. The reason why Google retrieved that, generated that text was it saw in some Reddit thread someone wrote that as a joke, but the AI bot, it just learned to generate that text, and so it didn't understand that it was a joke, that it wasn't something serious. So while these general AI tools are trained on text that is present on the internet, whenever we're thinking about deploying these tools for any kind of specialized area, any subject, then first of all, we don't want it to retain text that anyone wrote on the internet. Also, we want it to be very familiar with text that has undergone a lot of scrutiny by experts. Textbooks, reference books, research literature. So usually, nowadays, the kind of AI tools that are developed for any particular area, any particular subject, we call these tools as foundational models. So foundational models are generally trained on text that is relevant to one particular subject area, and again, people generally test these models quite extensively to see whether they are providing the proper level of expert feedback. The general question of reliability, of whether proper restrictions are being set, these questions exist irrespective of the AI model, whether it is ChatGPT or more specialized foundation models. But right now, the focus is on generating foundation models for specialized areas, so that for that subject, the best possible advice can be retrieved Mainly because these chatbots have been trained with a focus on that expert curated literature.
The other incident that you mentioned in passing was the so in the US about ChatGPT or some platform generating fictitious cases as citation. Why do you think AI felt the need to do that? It's almost like working like a human being.
I think the better way to think about it is that the AI tools, they should not provide accurate responses all the time because they are probabilistic agents. So what they'll do is, if we give it an instruction, it will give a response that it deems as the most probable response to that question. So if we want to maintain accuracy, then one way of course is to develop very specialized models that are only exposed to literature curated by experts. If not, then general models that have been just trained on any kind of text present from any source, we actually should expect them to make a lot of errors and just provide some kind of text that looks reasonable. However, whether it is accurate or not, that cannot be guaranteed from a general purpose model. Having said that, we were just playing around with some of these chatbots in preparation for this discussion, and we saw that in the context of Indian law, ChatGPT was providing reasonably accurate answers, not all the time, but if I was asking very general legal questions, then not only were the proper restrictions in place, the answers were more accurate than, let's say, than they were a year ago. So that means that they have been updating their models with Indian text. For companies like ChatGPT, apparently over 30% of their users are Indians. So it's quite reasonable to know that they will be training their models on Indian legal documents. But I did not come across any official documentation from OpenAI that regarding whether, how confident are they on the accuracy of the text generated by ChatGPT related to Indian law questions. So this is something that I don't think they are comfortable stating right now. But these platforms that exist, they make certain claims because they are training their AI models more specifically only on Indian legal documents.
In the ongoing World Cup, we see ChatGPT being a major television broadcast partner. So do you think that if usage in India goes up, that also means geographical domain specific knowledge in ChatGPT also goes up, which would trigger more accuracy in questions or prompts generating from India, like you say, it is working well tolerably with Indian law related questions. So if more, say, Indian law students start interacting with ChatGPT, would that indicate a higher performance from the Indian perspective?
Yes, in general, the general principle to keep in mind is that if we can expect a lot of data to exist related to the question that we have, then we can expect the chat models to provide fairly accurate answer. However, across different fields, what are areas where we can expect a lot of data to exist? This is something that experts can answer in general very well. So for example, if I'm interested in maybe a question related to let's say cancer. Maybe I'm thinking about a certain rare kind of cancer. However, it's not as rare as a lot of the really rare cancers. And even though it's a rare cancer, it still occurs for a lot of people. So the literature on that kind of cancer, that maybe I can expect that literature to be much larger compared to even more rare cancers. And so if I ask ChatGPT a question related to it, maybe it will give an accurate answer. However, if I am not aware of the degree of rarity of the cancer, which I probably won't be as I'm not an expert, then I would probably not be able to get that estimate. I would still ask that question. I'd ask ChatGPT, tell me about it. And I'd see a response from ChatGPT. But because I don't have the expertise, I wouldn't also have the intuition, that sense, when I'm going through ChatGPT's answer of how accurate this answer is going to be. So there exists a discrepancy like in any kind of specialized fields. Experts will be able to recommend much better to what degree certain areas these ChatGPT like tools will be able to answer accurately, because a lot of data is present. And if a lot of data is not present, which again the experts will know this very well, then we can expect ChatGPT to not provide a very high quality response.
Because my first intuition on seeing the ChatGPT logo on the television screen last time was, why are they bothering to spend money? I mean, there
Yes.
must be some logic to this.
Yes.
And there is a free thing. It's not like they're setting up a
Free for now.
Thank you. I think you have answered my question. What I want to ask, I think show the magic school where it is more on education purpose it was made, and some of the precaution is being taken from the student side to build the critical thinking and how can we, how a good question can be asked of the student. But when we come to the legal industry specific models, so have you come across the model that is more industry specific, which is not giving the false case or not every time coming up with a positive legal opinion or not agreeing with the users when you come across this kind of model or something?
In general, it's very difficult to answer. I think whenever I have spoken to experts from any field, whether it's from medical field or the legal field, there is certainly a big degree of hesitancy to, let's say, advocate the use of these tools without any knowledge of that field. Because as I just touched upon, if I have no knowledge of the field, I don't know whether there is a lot of data related to my question or there's very low amount of data. So I don't know how accurate the response will be. It just depends on the amount of data that is available. So I'm actually interested in knowing, like, for people who are studying law, what has your experience been like in using these kinds of ChatGPT tools to either do research or for education purposes? More or less accurate. Yes.
Recently, we have seen that there are new laws and there are old laws. There are new laws as well as there are old laws. So they are giving comparative analysis also. We
Yes.
are even asking.
So then, since again, because India is such a big audience for ChatGPT, they are definitely refining their model on Indian documents.
Since the last 1-2 years, it has been very easy.
Yes, and
In terms of legal research.
So most important, one is needs to have the knowledge of the domain.
yes,
What I am doing. Other than that, I think it's very much easy to check the information which is produced by ChatGPT or any AI tool.
yes,
That
without
we learn from books and classes. It's a prerequisite.
absolutely, because it's very difficult to judge the accuracy otherwise. Yes, and till now ChatGPT is free. One of the reasons why a lot of these tools are free or are being offered as free is because these companies are currently collecting all the questions and answers that are being generated, and they're also using that to further refine their model. So if people ask a lot of questions, maybe in certain areas of laws, then we can even expect that they'll recognize that, okay, that's an area where a lot of questions have been raised. So they'll look at a lot more data and train their model on those areas as well. So currently as we are using these free models, we are in a way helping them improve their models as well, which is why it's free for now. But yeah, the general answer remains that experts have that knowledge of on which areas we can expect not that much data to exist. In general, these chatbots, they tend to work more unreliably in such areas.
So most importantly, the prompt which we are using, the prompt should be precise and the prompt should be asked wisely.
Yes, this has been true for quite a while. Right now, there's a little bit of refinement going on so that from even a very loose, unstructured prompt, these ChatGPT models, they will try to sense what is being asked, even when not being that structured that well. But once again, while this also performs well for general questions, the moment you enter specialized areas, general prompts fail, but structured prompts, they tend to do a little bit better across fields.
Because if I do my example, we have a lot of cases of Vinci metadata. If we do not precisely mention that which case we are going to keep your searching for, that is Polian casting case or Ganga pollution case, then it's a bit difficult for a person who does not have a knowledge of law to delve in the case and what is he actually looking for.
Yes,
He may get some result from another case which he is not looking for.
yes. Yes, without expertise, that relevance, determining it is very challenging. Yes.
First of all, good afternoon, sir. So my question here is, like, as we see in the US and the UK, they have a common law pattern or kingship pattern that they follow for law. But in India, we see we have varied laws. Like, we don't rely on only the constitution. With constitution, we have backed up laws, or we have laws that take references to each other. And so in India, if we are planning to make a particular AI platform, which allows us to, make a platform where we put questions in prompt form and they will give us a particular answer. So currently, while ma'am was asking her question, she mentioned about the large amount of data and the small amount of data. So if in India's example we see, as we have so many laws, automatically the data count increases. So in such situation, what is more preferred? If we leave the particular GPT to take feedbacks and grow, or do we prefer a supervised learning for it? Because it will definitely give a very, very different aspect if it's unsupervised and only learning from feedbacks, and if it is supervised by the creator or the inventor of it. If it's programmed in that manner, or like A manner or B manner, both the things will be very much varied. So for Indian law form, which is more preferred?
It's a very interesting question. Right now, the AI initiatives that are going on from the side of the government, they are trying to figure out what are ways in which they can develop AI tools targeted for these platforms, which means experts from the area will actually recommend the kind of curated data that should be considered in order to build these AI tools. Right now, while this is still an ongoing operation, I'm not completely sure how successful things are, but what we are expecting in general, like not just in the legal field, what we are expecting is that if we focus on specific areas, then we can develop small targeted AI models that are knowledgeable in that area, and because they don't have to be general purpose, we are expecting, again, this is not definite, but we're expecting them to have much lower environmental footprint as well. So while we didn't talk about environmental footprint in this session, we'll go into a lot more detail in the next session. So that is the expectation, that we should have smaller models that work very well in specialized area when the data is curated by experts. However, this is still ongoing. I'm not aware of a lot of platforms that are being actively promoted right now. It's mostly still being developed.